Hello everyone, welcome to today's video, and as shown in the title, we are going to be talking about the first Hokage Hashirama Senju. Now if you ask most Naruto fans how powerful Hashirama is, they generally say he's the most powerful of the Hokage in Shippuden, he's the strongest ninja ever, something along those lines essentially. However, the aim of today's video is to pinpoint exactly how powerful he is, and also shed some light on certain lore surrounding his power. So, let's begin. Now the thing with Hashirama in part 2 is that a lot of things we know about him today aren't really shown in part 1, and I'd argue that Kishimoto hadn't actually even originally planned for Hashirama's later powers in part 1. You see, the reason I'm saying this is mainly due to the lore surrounding Hiruzen, the third Hokage. The problem with Hiruzen is that there are just an absolutely ridiculous amount of statements saying that Hiruzen is just the strongest Hokage ever. They even go as far as to say in the first fanbook that he just flat out surpassed his predecessors. And they literally even show us a picture of Hashirama right next to it. So it's pretty clear that Kishimoto originally intended for Hiruzen to be that god of shinobi-esque character that Hashirama would later be known as. Then later on, Hiruzen would go on to fight Orochimaru, and Hashirama would be revived by the Edo Tensei. And all throughout the fight, he seems to be pretty powerful, with him even putting Hiruzen in some bad spots at times. But he would eventually still be defeated by Hiruzen with the Reaper Death Seal. Keep in mind that Hiruzen is not only fighting Hashirama, but fighting Tobirama as well, and he still manages to get the better of both of them. So the statements I mentioned earlier aren't really contradicted. Now something that's important to mention is that the idea that the Edo Tenseis were nerfed was not something that was at all implied or stated in part 1. In fact, this concept wasn't introduced to us until chapter 620 of the manga, when the Hokage would be revived once again. So with all the feats and statements saying Hiruzen is stronger than Hashirama, how exactly is it that later on Hashirama would be recognized as the strongest of all the past Hokage? Well, there's two ways to explain it. The first is a way that a lot of people in the fandom like to use, and that is the idea that Hiruzen currently isn't on Hashirama's level, but rather when he was in his prime, he was on Hashirama's level. Now, to be fair, there is some credence to this, as even Hiruzen himself admits that had he been any younger against Orochimaru, he would have easily won the fight. It's also made pretty clear in their fight that Hiruzen had pretty much fell off, and that old age had caught up to him, and he's not really the same shinobi he used to be. So you really could argue that a lot of this hype is based on a past and far stronger Hiruzen, rather than a current old and past his prime Hiruzen. The second and probably the most likely explanation is that Kishimoto simply didn't plan that far ahead, and Hashirama's powers were essentially retconned. There are a lot of examples of things in part 1 that weren't exactly fleshed out until much later into the series, so I think it's pretty fair to say that Hashirama was one of those things, and just originally wasn't meant to be as powerful as he is now. However, it doesn't really matter which way you slice it. It's just pretty clear that the narrative surrounding Hashirama definitely changed drastically, and I think it should go without saying that characters like Hiruzen and Orochimaru simply can't compare to the first Hokage. Now we get into part 2 of the series, and here's when Hashirama is essentially solidified as the GOAT. It would take some time before we see the legendary battle that took place at the Final Valley, but even before then we still get some tidbits of information about Hashirama and how powerful he is. The databooks pretty much confirm that he is indeed the strongest ninja to have ever lived, claiming him to be the god of shinobi. The third databook describes his usage of the wood style and its ability to control the tailed beast as the reason for him having no peer in the shinobi world. A lot more information about wood style and Hashirama would be revealed from the introduction of Yamato. Being experimented on and having been implanted with the first Hokage's DNA allowed Yamato to use the same wood style as Hashirama, albeit on a much smaller scale. One of the main properties of the wood style is its ability to, quote, completely control the tailed beast, as stated by Orochimaru. In fact, it's so good at controlling the tailed beast that Hashirama was able to capture most of them, and would later go on to split them amongst nations as a means of peace agreements. It's actually pretty insane that it took the Akatsuki several years to capture the Biju, and the Akatsuki itself is an entire organization made up of several powerful beings, yet here's Hashirama just capturing most of them by himself. In chapter 620, Hashirama would once again be revived by Orochimaru, and we would finally see the legendary battle that took place between Madara and Hashirama. The first page shows us Hashirama and Madara immediately clashing with one another. We then see Hashirama pretty effortlessly wrap Kurama with his Wood Dragon jutsu. Keep in mind that this very same Wood Dragon, as stated by Madara, was used to also pretty effortlessly trap and bind KCM2 Naruto. So suffice to say, this jutsu is pretty damn fast. Hashirama then pretty much palms a Nine Tails Biju Bomb with his Wood Golem jutsu. He's then able to tank said explosion with his Wood Expulsion jutsu, and the wooden structure seems to have taken virtually no damage, meaning that these wooden structures are quite durable to say the least. Madara then swings at Hashirama with his majestic attire Susanoo, and Hashirama just casually reacts and grabs it. This is Kurama wrapped around with the perfect Susanoo swinging down on Hashirama, and he just grabs it like it's nothing. He then blocks a Biju Bomb with his 5 Rashomon gates, 2 more than even Orochimaru could summon. Then, after Madara seemingly can't be reasoned with and intends to continue his destruction, Hashirama finally resolves himself to stopping Madara once and for all. He then finally enters Sage Mode and summons the 1,000-hand Buddha statue. Now, in case you haven't noticed by now, all of the feats I just mentioned are Hashirama in base. So this is base Hashirama contending Madara and Kurama at the same time. After destroying the armor of the Susanoo with his 1,000-hand Buddha statue, Hashirama then goes on to pretty much blitz Kurama and suppress him, and then later on in the final clash with Madara, take his back and finally defeat him. Now, I think it should go without saying that beating Madara in itself is such a massive feat because of the fact that Madara is just an absolute monster. Madara is constantly referred to as the strongest Uchiha pretty much ever, scaling him easily over the likes of Obito, Sasuke, and even Itachi. And it wasn't just Madara he was battling. He fought the Nine Tails as well, and pretty easily dealt with him too. Pain, who is a user of the Rinnegan, was pretty awestruck at even half of Kurama's power, and couldn't even imagine that, once again, half of Kurama was this powerful. After Hashirama recounts his battle with Madara, him and the other Hokage was set out to finally help the Shinobi Alliance. Now revived as an Edo Tensei, Hashirama gets to display even more feats than he already has. Keep in mind it is stated by Tobirama that the Edo Tensei are close, but not exactly at full power. Of course, it's unclear exactly how much the nerf is at this point. It's still worth noting that this Hashirama isn't actually at full power and should be a bit weaker than his prime alive self. After arriving to the battlefield and creating the 4-flame Crimson Barrier with the other Hokage, Hashirama would then use his Sage Art Deity Gates. Now, this is a jutsu that Hashirama hadn't used in his battle against Madara, or at least we hadn't seen him use, and it's one of the many sealing jutsu that Hashirama has. It was so strong, in fact, that it was able to completely restrict the movements of the Ten Tails. He also uses the Head Seal Deity Gates, which is described in the databook as being able to completely seal the will of the opposing. The databook also says that Hashirama can essentially change the size of the gates, allowing him to pretty much seal whoever he wants no matter their size. Later on in the war, Obito would become the Ten Tails Jinchuriki, and Hashirama would rush to try to help the others in their battle against Obito, to which he is then stopped by Madara, and thus it would lead to the rematch between Madara and Hashirama. However, this time Madara has the Rinnegan now. Unfortunately, a lot of this fight does take place off screen, however we do see tidbits of the fight here and there. Like we see Hashirama going blow for blow with Madara's perfect Susanoo with his own Wood Golem jutsu. Remember, this isn't even his most powerful jutsu, that being the 1,000-hand Buddha statue. In fact, Hashirama doesn't ever use the 1,000-hand Buddha statue in the entire war. That may possibly be a symptom of the Edo Tensei, similar to Tobirama not being able to create much shadow clones. However, it's still crazy how he's able to match Madara without that insanely powerful jutsu. We fast forward quite a bit and we see that Hashirama once again manages to defeat Madara, and his sealing jutsu also capable of preventing Madara from absorbing ninjutsu with the Rinnegan, and has him pinned down under the Deity Gates. While we're on the subject of Edo Madara, I want to discuss some of the things Madara does prior to this encounter. The reason is because after Kabuto revived him with Hashirama cells, Madara is able to replicate a lot of Hashirama's wood style abilities. I mentioned the Wood Dragon earlier, but there's also the Deep Forest Emergence jutsu where Hashirama can literally create an entire forest, and on top of that create flowers that release a pollen that knocks out whoever's in it. In his fight against the 5 Kage, he's pretty much clowning on them for how weak they are in comparison to Hashirama, and even comments how weak Tsunade's healing jutsu are in comparison to Hashirama's ability to heal without hand signs. The databook describes it as, to this day, being completely unsurpassed as well. Of course, there's a couple more statements of how only Hashirama can defeat Madara, but again, at this point, it should just go without saying. But it still helps to illustrate the point that Hashirama is on a completely different tier from everyone else. The last thing I wanted to touch up on is there are a lot of statements made about Sasuke and Naruto later into the war in relation to Hashirama and Madara respectively. I don't think it's really controversial to say that 6-Path Sage Mode Naruto and Rinnegan Sasuke would absolutely slam Hashirama. In fact, it's just blatantly stated so. I do, however, believe that Hashirama is more powerful than both of them individually prior to receiving this 6-Paths amps. You see, we get a statement from Orochimaru that heavily implies, if not just shy of outright states, that Sasuke with the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan isn't quite at Madara's level yet. Orochimaru seems to think that there will come a time that Sasuke will surpass Madara, and that he still hasn't reached his ceiling yet. This is even further supported by Tobirama also saying that Sasuke shows that same potential. Seeing as they both say he will one day in the future surpass Madara, implies that he had not surpassed him just yet. This very same Sasuke is shown to be very much on par with KCM2 Sage Mode Naruto, on multiple occasions in fact. This would mean that Madara would scale over EMS Sasuke with his Senjutsu Susanoo, and even KCM2 Sage Mode Naruto. Now it's not quite clear if they're referencing Edo Madara or the Madara from the Final Valley, however Hashirama was able to beat both of them, meaning that no matter which Madara you argue it's talking about, Hashirama would still scale over them. You even get another statement from Tobirama as well, similarly implying the potential for Biju Sage Mode Naruto to surpass Hashirama, which would further corroborate what I'm saying. So all in all, I think it's pretty clearly demonstrated that Hashirama doesn't really get surpassed until a little bit later in the war, meaning that Hashirama would still scale over the likes of EMS Sasuke and KCM2 Sage Mode Naruto. That is going to conclude today's video. Thank you all who actually watched the whole video and made it to this point. I would ask that you like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, as we still have a lot more content coming in the future. So once again, thanks and goodbye.